So this is 6 minutes to 21 hours, or 2100 hours GMT on Sunday, the 23rd of August 2020. This is the test phase of the Kudila television, but the contents are not subject to verification. They are finalized, edited, presented, and broadcast, and they will be made available to the relevant audience, wider numbers of audience than probably reaching at this stage, because we are deliberately restricting circulation at this stage as we are testing the technology and various technical factors of the broadcast, not of the contents of what we are broadcasting. This is part two of the diagnosis, the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street Media, the British media, the Westminster based, London based, London centric media. And we had to get hold of the Communist Party Morning Star because it's not covered by the news agents that we use to buy the ordinary main titles, including the Sunday Boris Graph. And what is happening in the Morning Star, we call it the Star despite the fact that it is actually opposed to the agenda presented on the Boris Graph and the Mail on Sunday and the Sun on Sunday. The reason is, one of the reasons is that the weekend edition, which is Saturday and Sunday, August the 22nd and 23rd, 2020, it is covering the so-called extension to the moratorium, that is the ban on court proceedings on evictions that Robert Jenrick was forced to announce up to the 20th of September 2020. He did that 2 days earlier. So they are saying that this is a new kind of last grasp U-turn by the Boris fronted regime. For us, it is more than that. It is actually the evidence of the total morass in British politics when it comes to providing basic human rights on housing. Housing is not treated with the seriousness that it deserves in terms of the implications it has on people's lives. And I refer particularly to Keir Starmer and his failure to grasp the nettle and to address the issue of the human rights that housing constitutes, but has not been given any acknowledgement up to now. And this is the condition that remains the same. And the Morning Star is saying that Starmer has said the ban on the court proceedings on evictions should not be lifted until the government has a credible plan to ensure that no one loses their home as a result of coronavirus. Now, this is preposterously vague and irrelevant because the loss of home is nothing to do with one particular emergency. Loss of home is the most serious emergency that can afflict an individual or a family or a number of people in a family. And what Starmer's statement fails to do is to acknowledge decades of denial of the housing rights of people and decades of failures by the court system to uphold people's rights and to hear people's pleas. The courts, especially the magistrates' courts and the county courts, have abused their positions, regardless of the statutory limits to their powers as to what they can do and cannot do. That is a completely flimsy diversion that actually takes no account of the real function of these courts in granting straightforward, straightaway eviction applications, which they have been granting for decades. The court system is totally corrupt and unfit for purpose. And as the Director of Public Prosecution for 5 years, Starmer knew that the courts were failing to uphold constitutional, legal, universally acclaimed and enshrined rights of the people affected by the attacks on their housing rights. And yet he is not addressing that. He's talking about coronavirus. Coronavirus is, of course, causing people to lose homes, but the overall number affected by evictions and robbery of their homes, they are not robbed because of coronavirus, but they're robbed because of other factors and other licenses, de facto licenses, that landlords are allowed in this country. And the courts have colluded with landlords, courts have colluded with local councils as well, which have been a major, if not the major, source of evictions and robbery of the right to home and housing. And it affects millions of people. And the millions of people are not going to be reprieved, if you like, or relieved, or be kind of freed from the scourge of loss of homes and the destructive implications that has on every single person's life. And so this piece on the Morning Star is a scarring piece. That is to say, it's distorting the evidence. The evidence that I have just summarized is available to them if they wanted to tell the whole truth. But they don't tell the truth. That is why I call it the Morning Star. Even when they have the full evidence or the damning evidence or the serious lethal evidence to condemn the measures announced by Robert Jendrik. Now, this broadcast is aimed at the international decision makers and, quote, member state decision makers in the case of the UK. And therefore, we are delivering this service in the English language, one of the two mainly internationally used languages. And we don't believe that the choice of language, the English, will in any way impede or impair the communication of the message, which is very urgent, not only about housing, not only about evictions, but also about other aspects and other issues of government behavior and governmental behavior that we are addressing and are going to expand on in terms of the extent of our examination and investigation into various behavior and decision making. So anyone who is under the impression that we are not addressing the local community, say in Tower Hamlets or in Newham, because we are not speaking in the languages that are included in the main spoken languages in these areas, must understand the reason why we are using the English language. First of all, it doesn't then require to be translated or interpreted or misinterpreted by all kinds of people who do not have the correct facilities and the correct aptitude and the correct understanding of the issues to translate them to the main decision-making parliament and ministries and all the rest of it. So that is one factor. The other is that the people in the communities like, for example, not exclusively but like the Bangladeshis in the case of Tower Hamlets, where the Bangladeshis are being abused and misrepresented by their elected councillors and the executive mayor system. The elected mayor system is now occupied and personified by the diminutive John Biggs. John Biggs, apparently or allegedly, said to one of the channels that I appeared on in April 2016, and the person who claimed to have been approached at that channel in that period about the contents of my particular broadcast of the Khudila campaign program, about 4 or 5 or at the most 6 editions, claimed to have been approached on the phone by members of the Tower Hamlets, Labour controlled council's mayor's regime about what I was saying. And he claimed that I had defamed John Biggs. He said to me that he received 100 calls. Now, this is now August 2020, which is more than 4 years since he made that claim that he was contacted by people supporting John Biggs. And he said he got as many as 100 calls. Now, this one is a recorded, evidential, factual, legal statement I'm making throughout. And I'm asking this person who will get access to this at one stage or another to provide me with a list of those 100. Because he could not give me a 100 if it was 90 or 80 or 70 calls. He gave 100. So he must have received 100 calls, or he did not tell the truth. And if he didn't tell the truth, then he must communicate that confession that he didn't tell me the truth. Assuming that he did tell the truth, which I have maintained, assuming throughout the last 4 years plus, he must give me the names of those 100 people. Because nothing in any of my broadcasts constituted anything defamatory. Because if it is fact, if it is true, then it is not defamatory. That's the basic answer. And I told only the truth. I relied only on the evidence. And I have maintained this for the last 4 years plus few months. And I've asked this person repeatedly to give me those names. And this person has not denied having made that claim to me, that he was approached or called or contacted by 100 people that allegedly said that I had defamed. I had defamed John Biggs. I never defamed him because everything I have said about John Biggs is factual, fact-based. Not only that, I have repeatedly asked Tower Hamlets Council, their press office, to tell me if anything I have said in any of the broadcasts was in any way subject to their questioning, let alone saying anything was subject to their questioning, or John Biggs's questioning, or Tower Hamlets Council's monitoring officers questioning. They have not. They have never, ever answered that question. And they have not said there was anything questionable in the contents of any of my broadcasts that named and identified and reported and campaigned in the reporting and in the broadcasts against the behavior, against the role played by John Biggs. So I'm saying to that person who claimed that he was approached or contacted by 100 persons who said that I had defamed John Biggs, or I had unfairly attacked John Biggs, or I had attacked him without any reason, or anything else that I had said according to that claim. I'm asking him finally in this broadcast to make that information available. And he must treat this as legal notice confirmation to him that he must provide that. And that is only the beginning of the legal notice to him. The other legal notices and demands for evidence and substantiation and withdrawal and retractions of various other claims and allegations that the same person has made must be addressed rigorously and without assuming that they will not be pursued thoroughly up to the highest available constitutional legal point. So having said this, I am coming to talk about the current position in relation to one update in August. It goes back to 2007. And I'm talking about the media not covering any of this in the last 13 years, since July 2007, when an outfit called First Solution, which was based at the East London Mosque, situated in the Whitechapel Road, London E1 in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. The East London Mosque building had the London Muslim Center. So it's the same complex, and the London Muslim Center is used to let rooms to various businesses. And one of the businesses that it was the London Muslim Center space was rented out to was called First Solution. Now, many people, because of the linguistic limitations, have not always correctly spelled it, either called it First Solution or sometimes called it First Solutions. Whatever the correct name or the spelling, or whatever the actual officially listed name or the spelling of that outfit, essentially, the fact that it was located as headquartered at the London Muslim Center in the Whitechapel Road added to the implication or the implied suggestion that it was, quote, Muslim friendly, and that it was a Muslim outfit or Muslim business. Whatever the purpose, that was the suggestion, and that is the message that is given by anyone locating their activities at the place called London Muslim Center. I have to say that neither the London Muslim Center nor the management committee of the East London Mosque, which is situated in the same complex, is democratically constituted, representing the ordinary Muslims in the Borough of Tower Hamlets, let alone from wider London area. It is a very restricted operation, and it is not compatible with the transparency, ethics, and morality and accountability standards and values that most Muslims assume Muslim or Islamic organizations to be run on. So therefore, the London Muslim Center, whoever manages it or managed it in 2007, or whenever they had rented a property to, or rented out a property or part of the complex or room or rooms to this thing called First Solution, they never, ever did any of their business dealings by complying with the objectively highest standards of transparency as required in Islam or in Sharia. And if they did that, then they have kept it a secret for 13 years. Because for 13 years, as a leading campaigner for the people to get their money back, I have waited for the disclosure of a position statement by the London Muslim Centre management, and they have not produced anything. In the various public statements made at the time, remember that was 3 years before the 2010 general election. So the local MP in Bethnal Green and Bow was George Galloway. And Galloway was still being feted by not only people close to the London Muslim Centre and the East London Mosque, but also people that are now carrying the bag of John Biggs, the diminutive John Biggs. He has a bigger bag than his height. So this high bag is being carried in Brick Lane by many people that were carrying George Galloway's bag, politically speaking, connection-wise. So what we have got in the Brick Lane and in the East London area is a lot of people that affiliate themselves to anyone who is incumbent in a position either as mayor or as the local MP. And these people are disgracing the local community by that kind of behavior because they are not doing it in order to promote the obligations owed by the incumbents to the local communities, but to further their own image and their enterprise and their marketability. So, in that context, George Galloway was being manipulated and maneuvered by a number of persons that thought that the outcry following the disclosure of that Fast Solution had stolen a large number of money, handed it by hardworking migrant Bangladeshis working in this country, and they wanted that money to be remitted through the Fast Solution to their relatives and friends and other people they wanted the money to be sent to. That money was stolen. And that money was stolen from people that hardly could afford to lose that kind of money. Now, that money was stolen by a Bangladeshi operation. It wasn't stolen by a British Bank of England or the British Business Ministry operation. So George Galloway was completely maneuvered, manipulated away from the focus of the Bangladeshi community, and he spilled a long spiel in the House of Commons. And he gave a grave series of imageries and said that the shock was similar to a flood. I mean, he was obviously alluding to the flood that visits Bangladesh, which is currently visiting Bangladesh 13 years on. Now, George Galloway was totally wrong to be told to focus on the British government's liabilities. I said at the time, and I'm saying it 13 years on, and I've said it during the 13 years, that the thieves committed the theft not as part of the British government's financial irregularities or whatever. And there are absolutely millions of cases of financial irregularities and incompetence and laxity by the British government. But on this occasion, when Bangladeshi operation of a corrupt scam was aimed at looting and robbing Bangladeshis, it was not the fault of the British government. And George Galloway failed to understand that. Not only did he fail to understand that, when he got on his highly, widely reported abilities to be a romantic, he went overboard and he praised one of the right wing women, Labour MPs, Labour ministers at the time, who he thought was a kind of correct person to praise and ingratiate himself to. That person later, nothing to do with George Galloway doing anything wrong about that, but she was later exposed as having been dishonest in her role as a minister in the last days of the Gordon Brown regime. But essentially, George Galloway got it wrong. George Galloway got the East London constituency very wrong on very significant issues. And I shall come to update briefly on those points. But this one was actually unacceptably ignorant. So when I wrote a piece challenging what he had said, because I had written a piece in response to Galloway's speech being printed in an ethnicity-linked outlet, allegedly published to serve the local Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets. And it had, the main pages are in Bangladeshi language and the back pages were in English. So I asked them, or the so-called editor at the time, or the so-called executive editor at the time. Remember, this is the diagnosis of Fleet Street. So I'm actually going deep into the dysfunctionality of the ethnic city-linked media. So it is deeper and deeper and deeper than you will see ever on Sky News press preview or BBC News press slot. Now, these people promised to me that they would run my piece, challenging factually, evidentially, legally, and constitutionally separating the role of the UK minister or UK insolvency service, which Galloway actually overly hyped in his spiel. Now, that shows the fact that Galloway gave such a completely ignorant piece, ill-informed speech about something that affected hundreds of people, because many hundreds of people, because quite a large number of people gathered at the Alta Bali Park in July to express anger and outrage against the theft. And I'm saying this is all available, accessible evidence, because I was kind of trying to organize an action campaign to get the money back. And in order to sabotage my action campaign, crooks and their co-crooks organized a diversion, and they staged a rally in Alta Bali Park where Galloway gave a completely outlandish diversionary spiel. And several members of the Bangladeshi community belonging to this faction, that faction, some of them even had physical clashes during that rally. And one of the ingratiators with Galloway was seen standing next to him as if he wanted to be in the picture and all the rest of it. But there was no focus. There was no focal demand. There was no crystallized demand that actually the robbed and the people who had been kind of fleeced by past solution should be given their money back. So it was completely hijacked and destroyed. The focus of the attention of the first outrage victims that had assembled in Brick Lane immediately after the news got out that the past solution had collapsed. That outrage was digested by the abuse by the crooks and selfish punters of the position of George Galloway. They derailed the campaign by putting him up front and getting him to speak completely an irrelevant set of speeches. And that is why the actual moment was lost to get the money back. And the records are there that from that moment in July onwards, George Galloway took part in a number of other informal exchanges and communications that aggravated the distortion and the misrepresentation of the liability of the people who were liable. And instead of the thieves being caught and held to account and made to pay the money back, they fizzled out, they completely disappeared, and they managed to issue a serial set of lies and diversions. I'm saying this because I was the main campaigner that would have got the crooks to give the money back. And I was actually made to wait for the intervention of George Galloway. I was made to wait by people lying to me, saying that he will do what I was planning to do. It was a lying operation. One of the others, who was at that time a fan of Jim Fitzpatrick, actually had a row with me in a restaurant in Brick Lane. And he spoke to me, not in Sylheti, which he would do otherwise. He spoke to me in English and he said, "You dare criticize my MP." That was the depth of his anger at me questioning Jim Fitzpatrick, his MP. This is a matter of record. This is a matter of evidence. So the people who said that they were campaigning for the return of the money from the thieves of First Solution, they were actually sabotaging campaigns, and they significantly sabotaged me on behalf of their MPs. So both MPs, Jim Fitzpatrick and George Galloway, the two MPs for two constituencies in Tower Hamlets, were actually being served by their fans, within quotation marks. They are no longer fans. None of them is a fan of either MPs now. And that shows the reality of why so many campaigns in Tower Hamlets are sabotaged by people appearing to be either doing selfies or appearing in the so-called ethnicity-linked platforms. On the same week, in fact, on the 1st of July, if memory serves, there was a cultural event held somewhere near the Tower of London. I didn't go there, so I cannot visually say where it actually took place because I didn't see it. But it was held somewhere in the vicinity of the Tower of London. It was supposedly a cultural event centered on Bangladeshi or artists that had been invited from Bangladesh. So it was a Bangladesh-based kind of cultural event. During that event, the event host or organizer of the event, or the main business kind of organizer of the event, was on the stage, as was a person, a female, who was presenting the proceedings, and there was the person who is connected with the channel, what is called now Channel S, which started as Channel Sylhet Channel, based in Waltham Forest. And he started to speak, and from the videos that were recorded from behind the kind of audience, it can be seen that people were shouting in Siloti, Bangladeshi, at that person and calling him a thief. Now, the presenter stood there without doing much, but the actual host of the event, or the business organizer of the event, who was a counselor, and he actually spoke to the person being called a thief. And he spoke in a whisper, he spoke into his ear. And shortly after that, that person left the stage. Now, that was on videos. Now, not most of it, most of the proceedings was not on the video that we saw a brief part of online. But essentially, people were so outraged that they called that person a thief. And there was no kind of defense from the stage saying he's not a thief, or why are you calling him a thief, or anything in his defense. So he left, and the departure of that person from the stage, as shown on the video, including on slow motion videos, was quite clearly evidence of the high degree of outrage felt by the community at the first solution being the thieves that had stolen the money of these hardworking people. And the reason why that person was called a thief repeatedly and loudly was because it was understood that he had employed one of the main kind of directors of the first solution, or two of them, at his channel as in some capacity, or that he was in fact a partner of them in the business first solution. Now 13 years on, there is no justice for the people who have been robbed. There was no restoration of the money. And the reason is there is no consistent moral, ethical line of campaigning. It has to be distinguished. Campaigning has to be distinguished from people appearing on public platform, whether televised or otherwise, or their selfies being promoted online, or their faces being printed on the remaining papers in the name of, published in the name of the community. These people do like to have their faces shown as being involved in the campaigns. But when it comes to demanding real action that damages the careers of the crooks or the wrongdoers, these persons don't want to continue and stick to the principle. The only exception was when the election petition against Lutfur Rahman was actually taken to the point of actually being heard by Richard Morey. Some of the people who campaigned and said things against Lutfur Rahman stuck to the statements they had made and actually appeared, some of them even appeared as witnesses against Lutfur Rahman. That was an exception. And the reason why they did that, again, was not because they ceased to be opportunists or ceased to be dishonest in the other issues and other matters, but because they were of the view correctly that by continuing up to the last stage of the petition, they would be seen as loyal members of the Labour Party. That is what they were doing. And that is why most of the campaigns that have to be done against the Labour Control Council in Tower Hamlets fizzle out, because these people come in front and take over the positions and get the photographs and get even their spills and spiels on the so-called television channels, and then they disappear. They make, for example, one of the persons who suddenly surprisingly appeared at one of the broadcasts that I was appearing on against the Chris Street Market treachery, I was told that this person who was introduced as a fellow participant with me at the last minute, I was not consulted, that this person would serve as a kind of deterrent to anyone close to John Biggs feeling confident, because this person was a member of the Labour Party in this branch or that branch. But when he spoke, this person clearly said the Tower Hamlets Council had not done anything corrupt in colluding with the Chris Street Market project. That is on the record. And yet, my whole evidential argument and presentation has been based on the corrupt role played by Town Owners Council, by John Biggs, by the Town Owners Council collectively, as well as by the council's employees in the planning section. So whoever decided to insert that appearee into the program did that to sabotage the campaign against the corrupt regime in Town Owners Council. That is why successive attempts at campaigning against the corrupt behavior of Town Owners Council fizzle out, and nobody can actually identify how they did that. I have just identified a number of incidents. That is how they do it. They present the faces who overwhelm the kind of screen, and they make all kinds of spiels that amount to diverting attention from the critical corruption and crime that the council commits in the given case, in the given context. And none of that is acceptable on any level for the community, because the community is being lied to, lied about, and lied against by the creeps and the people who serve as, quote, labor leaders, labor activists or activists are actually activists for the corrupt cabals, the criminal cabal, and they are completely silent about the degeneration that goes on across the borough as a result of the corrupt policies and practices of Town Owners Council, which has been in the control of the Labour Party since 23rd of April 2015. And the Daily Boris Graph is the sister title of the Sunday Boris Graph. And they have managed to construct a kind of image of Boris Johnson and his fiancée that counters the kind of unfit for purpose pictures that the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror have been running in the last 3 days. And it is only predictable. And also, they are saying that he should be reopening the schools. Now, if there is no option, they're saying that the failure to reopen schools is not an option. That's what they are saying about Boris Johnson, who was found to be completely in a disarray position in the glamping kind of exhibitions. Then they are reconstructing him as a competent, in control Prime Minister. PM is not Johnson, is PM, threatening. I mean, he is in full control of his faculties, including his ability to concoct lies in Latin. And what has happened is that there is a tendency running through the Fleet Street papers, one side saying that there is a danger of the virus spreading and resurging and all the infections spreading if the schools are reopened or forced to be reopened. And the other is that schools must be reopened. And if they are not reopened, as this threateningly says, this Sunday Telegraph, Boris Graph, then it means that they will force the opening of the schools, and they will force people to be exposed to a resurgent spread of the virus. That is what is being predicted by most people opposing this forced reopening of the schools in a week's time. And there is on page 10 the continuation of the theme of the war on the migrants. The theme is that when they discovered that the Sudanese person who died of drowning near Sangat was not 16, but he was 28 years old. The underlying message is that the migrants are part of the fraudulent kind of claims they're making. That when they are older than children or childhood age, they are not eligible to the sympathy and whatever other support that children are supposed to be getting. They don't get it in reality, but that is what the difference is. So therefore, the line is now this week that most of the migrants are older than 18 years old. So they're not children, which means that really we are not being so cruel to the migrants because they're not children. Any human being who is older than 18 isn't worth protecting and safeguarding. What they're saying otherwise is that the 1951 Refugee Convention doesn't matter, as they're saying that nothing in the United Nations founding charters matters. They're saying that the UK's own Human Rights Act doesn't matter. So it's not a fantasy confected and conjured up by opponents of the Tories or the revolutionary Jeremy Corbyn or other demonized factors or characters. The reality is that the Tories are following open war against law, constitution, due process, international obligations, as open, as brazen, as blatant as Trump is doing in the USA. So it's not a secret, it's not a conspiracy theory to say that Boris Johnson is fronting a regime that is styled after Donald Trump. And all these connections between Trump and other forces and elements that interfere with the due democratic process of America are very much the same forces, elements that are influencing and controlling Boris Johnson's agenda. And those who are doing that are far more sinister, far more damaging to the ordinary standards of society and accountability and democracy in this country than 100 Jeremy Corbyns could ever manage to do. Because Corbyn, unlike Boris Johnson, was genuinely lacking in grasp of the issues. And Boris Johnson actually has the grasp of the issues, but he chooses to inflict violations and damages on the many and targets the victims according to race, according to gender, and according to region, as he is known to have done against the people of Scotland, people on the Merseyside in Liverpool, and the women, the Muslim women that wear the head scarf or the mask. Ironic, isn't it, that Boris Johnson has been unmasked as a very stupid person, because stupid in the sense that he abuses his knowledge and fans and incites hatred based on ethnicity, on religion, and especially brazenly violating his own claim that he has got among his ancestors Muslims and Turks and Turkish kind of noble people, etc. I mean, for somebody who has made a career by lying, Boris Johnson is very proficient in using the whole lines and all the lines of ancestry in the world. So he can fall back on any. He is not short of any links with any of the lineages. And he can do that because the opposition is absent. The opposition is not present. And he's not holding to him account, not scrutinizing his lying and fakery. Now the councils are complaining about road closures. This is the Sunday Tory graph or Boris graph. And the councils are not talking about evictions as far as they are concerned, because evictions are part of the agenda that the Daily and the Sunday Boris graph actually supports. And there is no criticism of the Boris fronted regime about the exam disaster. And there is this one, what is this? There is an afro-haired person called Calvin Robinson, who is given a byline that is typically the byline of a nephew Tom. And the Sunday Boris graph is reinforcing its demand for schools to be opened in an editorial. He's saying that closed schools are as big a threat as COVID. So they are really openly exposing the children to this virus resurgence. And there are other similar right-wing provocative items in the papers. And there is no connecting with the human rights, the housing rights, with the health rights, with the education rights of the many. And this is the Sunday papers in Free Street that are actually fueling the lies further. And the Daily Star on Sunday is also running a showbiz piece of idiocy and diversion that minimizes or completely cancels any threat of human rights violation that the thousands of migrants in France are experiencing as a result of the collusion between the French and the British governments, perpetrating and foisting on them and against them a hostile environment. Because the French are refusing them refugees there, and the British government is refusing them entry into Britain. So quite literally, they are being condemned to sink in the channel. And in that situation, it would be the least that the opposition government, an opposition party, could be expected to do is to sound the alarm that this is against the law, against the charter, against the declarations, against the conventions, that the UK remains obliged to uphold, even if there is a Brexit, because all these conventions are beyond and above Brexit, above the UK's membership of the European Union. And there is no word from Keir Starmer, there is no word from the other members of his shadow cabinet. And the same thing is happening with the case of the evictions and the loss of homes and the violation of the homes and the behavior of the councils and the destruction of people's lives by evictions and robbery of their homes. And the Sunday Express, which is a kind of subsidiary propaganda outfit for the Daily Borisgraph, is running a similar item saying that doctors are top doctors. Look at the exaggerated kind of image they're giving to those doctors who back Boris, forcing the schools to reopen. Top doctors. It's not enough to call them doctors. Top doctors. And inside, on pages 4 and 5, it is even worse. The summary is, the main headline is not only the top doctors, but the doctors and politicians at last agree on what's best for our pupils. As if they didn't rob the children en masse of their A-level grades only last week. This is a fantasy headline, completely untrue and unjustified and unsubstantiated. And yet it is the newspaper. So most of the gullibles, most of the people open to brainwashing continuing, would swallow it. It's in the paper and it is subliminal as well as brazen, as well as open and hidden. And the rest is typical diversions. And as if those propaganda for the last few weeks against the migrants, propaganda pieces were not bad enough in terms of human rights violations against the migrants. The Sunday Express is saying that the real culprits, the real lawbreakers, are the trafficking gangs, ruthless leaders of trafficking gangs. Now that is absolute lie. They are criminals of trafficking gangs, and they are ruthless in their particular enterprise. But the real offenders are Priti Patel and Boris Johnson and the others proxy fighting for them in Kent County Council, giving kind of local migrants from hell kind of stories to supplement the lies and the incitement that is being constantly kept up by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson's number 10. They are the ones who are making the refugees risk their lives crossing the channel as they do, because the applicants, the potential applicants or refugees, are denied processing in France, and they're denied processing when they reach Britain if they do. So there is no way that they are bothered about the truth. The Sunday Express is lying. That's the diagnosis of today's Sunday Express. It's lying again. And it's lying at the expense of the truth to which the ordinary people in Britain are entitled but are being deprived of. And these papers are like this. And the Sun on Sunday is talking about that Harry Maguire, the footballer's brawl. That shows that there is no virus in this country, there is no homelessness, there is no violation of the migrants' rights, there is no racist policies being pursued to hoodwink and divert and mislead the ordinary British people from the losses they are being caused every day. In fact, there is more anti-migrant kind of spill on page 8 of the Sun on Sunday, which is painting an exaggerated picture of kindness on the part of those who saved 9 migrants from sinking. They're not saying that these people should not be caused to even risk their lives by crossing the channel. And they're not saying that the reason why they are risking their lives is because their legal rights, international treaty, charter, convention rights that they are entitled to be protected under are being denied to them by French as well as by the British governments. And all the victims of these violations are mainly African and Asian. And all these victims are fleeing states of deadly insecurity, mayhem, starvation, hunger, caused by the wars imposed by the British, the French, and the Americans. The governments, that is, not the people. And the people are lied to at home, in America, in France, and in Britain. And the Sunday Mirror itself is talking about that footballer. So the Sunday Mirror supposedly against the government of the Conservatives is carrying on the pretense that everything is okay and there is no real pandemic anymore in this country. They've got a page 2 picture of a protest at Pandemic of Poverty. And it is about the eviction, the homelessness, which is the correct headline and the correct kind of subject. But they are not writing anything original, investigative. They are actually recycling the substance of an interview with a woman on Newsnight, Ghazal Haqqani of the London Renters Union, and they are quoting Polyneeth, who is the chief executive of the Shelter Housing Charity. And there is a piece which is a shorter piece about councils using bailiffs to evict people from their homes on unpaid council tax. And it's as horrendous being attacked by bailiffs on these grounds of council tax default and arrears. So the agenda of these councils, which are supposed to be not conservative because they're labor controlled, is the same as the labor councils, conservative government's agenda. Attack, violate, and hammer, and drive out of their homes the poorest and the low income. These are mostly white people. They are not migrants, most of them. So what's new and what is different with Keir Starmer? Nothing. And this conclusion keeps lending itself every time we do the diagnosis of the media. And whatever the United Nations has been celebrating, observing this week about the foundation of the organization or the good work that the humanitarians and the volunteers do, there is no evidence that the United Nations is saying what we have been saying. The United Nations should have been saying what we have been saying, that there are international treaties and obligations that are affected by the behavior of these governments which are violating those treaties and conventions and charters and declarations, everything that protects the migrants, the poor in the home, like in the case of the people subjected to bailiff attacks by local councils because of council tax arrears and debts, and by landlords who want the properties because they are not getting enough profit from the low income and the poor income people, tenants. So the alternative to this vacuum and this descent into darkness is to act organized way, politically raise the awareness, spread the facts and the evidence, investigate the behavior of the councils of the government, and relate these behavior to the various conventions and declarations and charters and the treaties that they are breaking. And look at the behavior of the councils in the courts, because most of the courts, as I have said, on the evidence, most of the courts are led by people who are prejudiced against tenants, prejudiced against people pushed into poverty, and prejudiced against migrants, against black people, against Asian people, against African people, and against people of a particular political opinion which is opposed to the lawlessness and the corruption status quo. And there is nothing in sight that this will change. Only because it is there, it will not change. Because the people who are in places in the councils, in the governments, and in positions as MPs are not making anything like the necessary magnitude of noise, let alone providing the alternative narrative, let alone providing the alternative set of steps that must be implemented to replace this oppressive, law-breaking, criminally minded, criminally abusing legal and court system. So we need to see such a revolutionary answer, not in a violent way, but in a procedurally, universally, ethically, morally sound and appropriate, compassionate way to help the victims of all the denials of justice and rights. So, how to do that is a mammoth task, but we have already made a beginning from this campaign, starting to issue notices to the government, to Kent County Council, and to the United Nations, and we shall be continuing the process and the actual communication of the notices and the advocacy that all of these parties and entities are breaking the laws and the legal obligations. And of course, we are doing the same in the relevant context applicable based on the evidence locally. We are doing the same against the identifiable perpetrators making the wrong decisions and lying by holding positions in the local councils, in Tower Hamlets, in Newham, and in other parts. So this edition of the diagnosis of the British media, the British Fleet Street Press of Sunday, the 23rd of August 2020, is being brought to a close at 22:04 hours GMT on Sunday, the 23rd of August 2020. We shall be continuing the next one in a few hours' time.